It was during Ziaul Haq's martial law days when Lahore, or actually the whole country, was not allowed to hold any cultural events or any kind of happenings that would make people enjoy themselves. And Faiz Foundation was very proud that Shyam Bengal, the great film director, filmmaker from India, accepted our invitation and came to Lahore. And then the venue was Goethe Institute, Lahore, because it was not allowed to hold any of these events publicly. They loaned us our space and we had a lecture by Shyam Bengal. Ladies and gentlemen, this was more than 35 years ago. So if the picture quality is not that good, I ask that you forgive me that I have been holding on to these treasures for too long. I should have put them out a long time ago. So ladies and gentlemen, listen to Shyam Bengal talking to an audience in Lahore invited by the Faiz Foundation at the Goethe Institute.
Welcome you all here this afternoon. The Faiz Foundation is indeed extremely proud and honored to have present here with us Mr. Shyam Bengal, the renowned filmmaker who accepted an invitation to attend the Faiz Mela activities this February. This is Mr. Bengal's first visit to Pakistan, and I hope that he will carry back with him pleasant memories of Lahore and Islamabad, where he is going with his wife this weekend. Mr. Bengal holds a master's degree in economics. He was born in Hyderabad, Deccan, and received most of his schooling there. Originally, his family comes from a small hamlet, in his own words, just a few kilometers out of Bangalore, Bangalore, also called Benegal, hence the family name. Shyam recalls that his passion for filmmaking goes back to the time when he was just a schoolboy. And over the years, when his father bought a camera into the home to shoot films of the family, Shyam's involvement with the moving picture grew stronger. Mr. Bengal has made over 1,000 advertising films, 50 documentaries, 16 feature films. His first full-length feature film he finished in 1973 and called it Ankur, the seedling. This film also starred a new actress at that time, Shabana Azmi, and other actors. This film went on to win 2 national awards and 45 other awards, including some international ones. His latest film that he has just completed before he came is called Antarnad, Inner Voice. He begins shooting his new film in April. In his own words, is there a life other than filmmaking? He has also made 2 full-length documentary films, one on Jawaharlal Nehru and the other on Satyajit Ray. Again, both of them have won national awards. He has also done some work for Doordarshan. Prominent among them is the series called Bharat Ki Khoj, a 54-part TV series based on Nehru's book Discovery of India. He has participated in many international film festivals and seminars. Mr. Bengal will introduce this afternoon's topic himself. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Goethe Institute, who have extended us very warm cooperation. And once again, let me thank Mr. and Mrs. Bengal for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Shyam Bengal.
Good afternoon. Many years ago, I was on a fellowship to work on children's films and so on. And at that time, in London, every month I had to go and collect my stipend, or whatever you call it when you have a fellowship, to this old gentleman who used to pay me this money every month. So once he asked me, he never asked me what I did, but one day he decided to ask me what I did. So I said, I'm a filmmaker. He said, young man, how dare you call yourself a maker of any kind of thing? You know, he said, there's only one maker, and that's God. And he said, well, there's also another kind of maker. And that's a poet, because poet in Greek means maker. And he was, when I thought about it, he was very right, because there is only another maker other than God, that's a poet. Because, as we all know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And poets deal with words, and words are expressions of life. And nobody can be greater than a poet. And of course, I'm so happy to be here and deeply honored to be here as to participate in the Faiz Foundation's Mela in honor of Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who probably was one of the great poets of the world and certainly the greatest contemporary Urdu poet in the subcontinent. Well, to take this business of filmmakers, because I still continue to call myself a filmmaker, one of the problems as against poetry, when you make a film, you're not dealing with this wonderful things like words. You're dealing with images, and the images are not expressions of life in the same way that words are expressions of life. And when you record an image, you have not created anything, you simply recorded it. So a filmmaker deals with a whole lot of recordings from life which he has not created or has given expression to in any way whatsoever. So the work that we are involved in, however, most filmmakers think that they are doing great things, but all they're doing is recording a whole lot of images that already exist and putting them together and making some kind of sense from it. And that's always a sobering thought, that what more can you do? Once you recorded all this, which is not really your own, can you do anything more than simply that? And this always worries one, because it's like a blank wall staring you in your face when you're making films. What are you actually doing when you say that you're making films? And I can tell you that this is the real limitation of the cinema. Unlike, for instance, when a poet writes poetry, or a writer, when he writes a book, it comes to life because the person who is listening or reading the poem or the book invests his life into it. A film, unfortunately, presumes to do all this for its audience, which is a dreadful pretension. Because after all, when I make a film, I have imbued it with all kinds of interpretations, given it all kinds of things, and I expect you simply to sit there passively and accept what I have done. Now this is the major limitation of the cinema. Major limitation, because there is nothing, there's no other art form that is quite like the cinema. And I always have believed that it's a lesser art. It's not a great art. It's not like music or poetry or literature. It's a much lesser art. And you require all kinds of circumstances. You have to create all kinds of circumstances in which, to captivate your audience. You have to have a darkened hall. You have to see that everybody is looking toward the screen. And then you show the film. And when you show the film, you are forcing yourself, into the audience's attention. Now, this kind of work, where there is a certain amount of coercion involved, because it is not as though it naturally comes into your consciousness, or you are working towards making a connection with what you're seeing, like in the work of a painter, for instance, When you watch a painting, the person who's watching the painting, there is a conscious and voluntary involvement into the space of that painting, of the viewer. While in the film, this is forced upon you. And this forcing upon the audience is its major weakness and also its major strength. Its major strength makes it a lesser art, strangely enough. Now, so when, for instance, and what do films really do? You know, one of Jean-Luc Godard, this great French filmmaker, once said that film really catches a dying moment, a moment that is dying. Because when you shoot something, that something will never be the same again. Because there is nothing like is in the cinema. It already becomes a was. And therefore, what we do when we make films is catch moments of life that will no longer be. So there is only the real the real subject for films, therefore, is that when you show the film over and over again, you have frozen a certain piece of time. You've frozen a certain piece of time which will never be again. So what does it do? It works like your memory. You know, it is a recollection. It's a remembrance. And it's a remembrance of things past. And so that's the second problem, that here is a medium that does wonderful things. Like, for instance, it deals with your past so brilliantly because it catches a moment in its passing, and it helps you to recover that moment, which is a wonderful thing, you know, that you can constantly recover that moment. But because it does that, it has yet another contradiction, because in that whole situation of trying to recover that moment and holding that moment lies its greatest, its real problem, that you cannot really deal with the present. You can never really deal with the present in the cinema. It always goes back into the past. It always takes you. It's always like a memory. And then it locks you into a certain time frame out of which you cannot get out of. It's like films do not travel in time. If you have made a film in 1945, it projects only 1945, whatever you do. If I make a film in 1992, it will be a film of 1992. You can't say that about literature. You cannot say that about literature. You cannot say that Shakespeare is the 16th century. It's only historically so, but otherwise it is living in front of you. That literature is a living literature, but with films, they are locked into the time during when it is made. Now, there are these kind of limitations to the cinema, and yet we continue to make films. Now, you see, I mean, I've talked about the limitations, but then you have also the advantage in the cinema, which is not given to so many other arts. And one of those advantages is that when I said it freezes a moment, that moment that is frozen in time is a moment in a process. And there is no better medium than to catch a moment, you know, a process, not the end nor the beginning, but the process. Now, very few art forms get you to do this. Cinema can do that. It has this great capability. You know, it can show you how things change, how life transforms, you can actually participate in that process. Now, this to me is the most important quality of films, which is the reason why I'm a filmmaker. I know the limitations of the cinema. I know its many constraints, but the fact that it can make, suddenly put you into a process. And therefore it is natural that when a filmmaker decides, when people make films, there is an automatic kind of, the way your mind works, the way you focus, you start to concern yourself with change. My own films, from the very beginning, have only been concerned with change. Constantly, because there is a possibility of showing the flux of life, the constant change of relationships, the constant change of man in his relationship to the environment, and so on and so forth. Now, this is probably the most remarkable quality. And once you realize that it is the process, you're dealing with the processes, then you can start to see the immense possibilities of what films are capable of doing. Now, John Grierson was one of the great documentary filmmakers, and is often called the father of the documentary movement. He said, documentary filmmaking, which I'm including all films essentially as documentary films, because whether you like it or not, you document life in the cinema. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter. You might make the most fantastic film, meaning films relating to fantasies. You can say, I make an escapist film or whatever, but it still remains a document. And he said that making a document is attempting to do a total observation of life. And if you do anything less than that, or attempt to do anything less than that, then you shouldn't be in the profession of filmmaking. And this business of total observation of life, the attempt to do this, make this total observation of life, does something to you, does something to the filmmaker. And what is that something? It connects you. It connects you to life, as we all want to be connected to life. And it connects you to life in the way a devotee connects himself to God. Now, this kind of devotion, devotion to life, can only mean that you wish to celebrate life. So if you wish to celebrate life, then what greater value can there be but humanism? The fact that you're connected to life, connected to living beings, and this is what you're concerned with, then obviously there can be only one objective. The objective is to constantly renew your connection with life and living. Now, unfortunately, the cinema has rarely been used in this fashion. Unfortunately, cinema has practically never really been used in the manner, for instance, in terms of, if I give you an example, look at the film industries of the world. Do they deal with cinema in these terms? They don't. It has always been reduced. It has been reduced to, because I said earlier that there is a coercive process. There's a forcing of attention of audiences, which means that film has great capacity to manipulate. You can manipulate people. And you can manipulate people because they happen to be passive receivers. They are not participating viewers, they are simply passive receivers because of the manner in which films are shown. And the first thing that people try to do is to exploit the situation. That is, if you can manipulate, go ahead and manipulate. So the so-called commercial cinema, all that it does constantly is to manipulate the audience. And in this manipulation, they do it in a way that willy-nilly, involuntarily, you get involved in the film. And the reason for getting involved in the film is because it directly hits your senses, unrelated, uncontextually with your mind and heart. Which is why, I mean, today we talk about, you know, there's so much violence and sex in films. Now the violence and sex in films is simply because when you see violence, when you immediately, you know, you are subjected and shown a lot of violence, whether you like it or not, it's like a magnet. You get caught up in it, and I mean, your mind is never involved in something like that. So, and the more you receive something mindlessly, the more easily you're manipulated. And therefore, I think audiences must have, you know, must voluntarily decide that films are not simply there for you to be manipulated by them, that you should be able to participate with the film. You should be able, and the day you refuse to be passive receivers is the day those films can die a natural death. And that's very important. Because you see, this only people can do this, because the industry works on completely different premises. You know, the basis of the industry is very different. The film, the art of film is something else. And I think that the main, if audiences don't do this, we are not likely ever to create a new cinema. A cinema that is worthwhile, a cinema that will extend our culture, a cinema that will actually be a product of our lives. It will not be. I think, therefore, that on one side you have to create filmmakers who will deal with film to celebrate life, and on the other side we have to create an audience that will reject films that are made simply to exploit them and manipulate them. I don't, you see, beyond this, I'm not sure that I have very much more to say, because all these things I have made, in fact, a series of statements. I do hope that, you know, while I have been making this short talk here, you would be, questions will arise in your mind, and you would like to put them to me, or you may wish to make some statements of your own, and that too you would like to put to me, and we could discuss them, because I'm not a particularly interesting speaker. The word lecture frightens me, and that's why although this is a lecture, I changed it to a talk. And I would like to have a kind of participatory discussion, because I think we have here an audience that seems to be very alive, and alive certainly to the cinema, and would like to participate in a discussion like this. And instead of my my going on and on, I would like to invite participation. Thank you very much. Yes, I will. Yes.
You said that it's always the past that's depicted, but it can represent the present.
Yes, but what Godard meant was that yes. Well, I'll repeat the question. Yes. If cinema is only depicting the past, can't it represent the present? Can it or can it not represent the present?
Or future.
Or future even. The fact is that, as I said, yes, it freezes a moment that will never be again, that will never come back again. You know, we look at films of the 1940s or 30s. I mean, you might look at anybody. I mean, you can think of any great star that you thought. Now, she was never like that ever again. You know, what she did once, and that was it. And that performance, unlike in the theater, you know, in the theater people play characters. You know, they play parts. But here, they are what, at a particular age, what they were. And that's what they will remain on film, whatever else happens. Now, can film deal with the present? Yes, film can deal with the present, but never directly. It's always tangentially. You see, it's always the points of reference, the point of, like say for instance, what you cannot do except to say this is happening in front of you and this is life. If you say that, actually you are lying. But you can say that this is the sort of thing, you create similitudes, you create resemblances of the present. Now we use techniques like, say, for example, flash forwards, you know, to suggest an anticipated future. You know, the film uses a lot of, I mean, in the film language there are so many ways of dealing with the present and future. But in actual physical fact, it doesn't do any more than catch a moment that will not exist anymore. Meaning that is going to pass. That's what it does.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
I think while discussing cinema vis-a-vis other forms of art, you are employing two different standards altogether. For cinema, you are using a digital concept of time, whereas for all other arts like poetry, novel, etc., or drama, whatever, you have used a linear concept of time. Whereby you are judging these cinema vis-a-vis the other art forms by totally different standards altogether. Therefore, this confusion arises.
I'm not quite sure that this is so. When you say digital, digitally photography, a single photograph would be digitally constructed time. Cinema doesn't, because when you are talking about time, there are two kinds of time. In fact, there are many kinds of time. One, there is real time, the real time that it takes for a certain action. Then there is time within the frame, which is left entirely to you to expand or to contract. You see, there are many kinds of that. There is a time of the interior, like there is a time of your mind, in which you can travel backwards and forwards, like that, you know, it doesn't, I mean, it's not even a flash, the way our minds can deal with time. Now, cinema can attempt to do these things. In fact, cinema attempts to do these things because it is in the cinema that you can do this most successfully. You know, these are different things. First, there is a physical manifestation, that is what happens physically when you shoot a film. That's one. What can you invest it with? Because it has the great advantage of having a time that expands or shrinks, and can be, so many dimensions can be given to it. So it is not digital at all. In fact, it is analogous and totally analogous, because the digital thing is only with a photograph. A photograph is a digital time concept.
Also, if a photograph is digital, isn't a single shot also?
Not necessarily, because there's a...
But actually, that gentleman has tried to find out from you is whether film is merely single shots or it is a composite and a narrative. What you have been asked is that actually what you have described is the process of filmmaking, not the film itself. The process of filmmaking is by single shots, which are later edited into the complete narrative. But it is the narrative which the public is seeing, not the single shot. So the public is seeing a narrative which can extend into time, into past, present, and future. So what actually you have tried to distinguish, to express as the distinguishing characteristic of film is not so. Actually, a shot is a phrase in poetry or a sentence in a novel. So what you should be discussing is the film as such, which is in most cases in our memory is a narrative. It is a dramatic narrative.
have you heard? Yes.
Which
Yes.
has been,
Yeah.
which has been brought into
Right.
a certain medium.
Right.
It is just like Shakespeare's film, Shakespeare's
Plays.
being made into a film. What would you call that?
No, but I'll take the first thing first. You can make a film with a single shot. So you see, it isn't that you need to have necessarily many shots to make a film. You can make a whole film with a single shot. The difference is that when I say that a photograph is frozen, it is frozen digitally frozen, while a shot on film is not frozen in the same way. It is not there is, it is not a moment where the life has been taken away from it. Now when you take a picture, it is a freeze. Film is not a freeze. So you can make a whole film. No, you can make a whole film. That's why I said it's not digital. You can make a whole film with one shot if you so desire. Now film, there is narrative in the cinema, but cinema does not only depend on narratives. You see, so here I was talking about the medium itself, because I think it's important that we do not pay enough attention to what this medium actually is, because both its limitations and potential have never really been seriously examined. And this is the reason why I took a little bit of time talking about all that, because it's a very important aspect. It's not simply to be used as a vehicle to take ideas or something, or a vehicle for propagandizing some political notion, or to sell something. It's not enough, because film has always been used simply for these things. I was talking about film in its usage, where it seems to have a natural use, which is to celebrate life. That was the point I was trying to make. So whether you do it in narrative ways or you do it, yes, please.
I think you were being just slightly humble when you referred to yourself being a filmmaker, not necessarily as related as your poet.
think what Moneeza and Khalid might have been pointing to was the fact, or my understanding of film as being a processes of the juxtapositioning of images, which are physical realities, which, as you say, are records or documentation of images which exist, which have nothing to do with the filmmaker himself or herself. But it's the third image which does not actually exist, but it's the third image which begins to exist in the understanding of the viewer, which is what is the creativity of the filmmaker. And that, in one way, to me, is something that is beyond the other arts, because every person in the audience will actually receive a different interpretation of that particular juxtapositioning of just maybe two images, or just maybe two actions within one shot. It would mean separately to a whole range of different people. I think in that sense, like filmmaking.
Yes. No. I think. In fact, I'm very happy she said that. I was hoping someone would say that. Yes.
Question and answer, but no speech.
No. But these are discussions. These are discussions. I think that is very important. Yes.
Excuse me, can the views out?
Yes.
What interests you to put on screen?
What?
What interests you most to put on screen?
Well, the subject matter. Now, often you see, as I said in one of my remarks, I said it seems natural for the cinema to deal with one particular emotion, which is nostalgia. Yes, and I have, in fact, explored nostalgia, and in fact, most films that we have considered worthwhile have always dealt with nostalgia. Try and examine among the films that you have enjoyed most or you have been involved with most, have dealt with this. Now it's interesting. I mean, there are other things that films can do. Now I do agree. I mean, the young lady here was saying, somebody wanted to find out what she said. She said you are needlessly saying that filmmakers, the filmmaking as a profession, images that already exist, which are not yours, when you put them together, you create a third reality, which is the reality you have created, which is true, which is what I said. I didn't want to say. I hope somebody else would say. अच्छा मैं क्या करता हूँ जी yes
because I think in one way film art is definitely very different from other arts, and that's a very practical aspect, that no painter, no poet would need $1 million to make a film and a crew of 100 and a cast of maybe 200. So all these practical aspects, when a film artist or a filmmaker conceives something as a poet or as a painter, but when he has to execute it, he is dependent on the distributors, on the finances, and on the audience, on the government censorship policies, on the availability of artists, etc., etc. So I think we in Pakistan would be very much interested to know how you, as an art filmmaker, for the want of a better term, manage to make such beautiful films which are socially relevant and aesthetically exciting. And you are still, I think you are one of the few people who are able to make some inroads into the commercial cinema. And you are obviously, you can see that you have been able to make films after Uncle. It means that you are able to at least recoup some of the money. So we will be very interested, having a very disappointing situation in Pakistan. We will be interested to know how you manage in the practical world and facing an industry like the Bombay film industry.
Sure. There are, you see, I'll make this a slightly longish answer if you don't mind. Well, you see, when I started making films, I mean, when I made my first feature film, I didn't expect that it would have the kind of success it actually had. Because if that film had failed with the audiences, even if it had received a very good press, it would have meant not quite the end of me. I don't think I give up that easily. I would have probably carried my next script to producers for another 12 years before I got some money to make a film. But because it was successful, we discovered that there was an audience. That was a very important thing, and it was a historical accident that it happened with my film, because there were films made before I did. I made Ankur. There was a film that Mrinal Sen had made called Bhuvan Shom, which received very, very favorable and it received a lot of critical acclaim, a very favorable press, but it didn't do terribly well at the box office. So it wasn't as though the producers were attracted towards making films like this. Then there was Garm Hawa, which was a superb film, a brilliant film. A lot of you may have already seen that film here. Now, you see, that film, when it was made, again, a similar kind of problem. There was very high critical acclaim. It also had a lot of censorship problems. But once the censorship problems were got over, the film didn't receive the kind of public response that we all felt it would get. And therefore, it was again felt that probably there's no audience for films like this. So when I made my film, I'm now talking of the national audience, I'm not talking of the Bengali audience or the Tamil audience or Malayalam audience and so on, because there have been films of a different kind made there, and they continue to be very successful, but the audience is small, it's homogeneous and so on. But here I'm talking of a whole heterogeneous group of people to who this film has to reach. So, and if it has to recover, it means that you have to recover from this area and cover the cost of the film, make a bit of profit, so that the man who's going to put money into your next film is confident that your film will run. Now, we discovered that there was an audience. And with the first film, that was what happened to me. I discovered there was this audience. When I made my second film, I discovered that not only was there an audience like this, it was also a loyal audience, which was a fantastic thing, to feel that you had a loyal audience. And they criticized my second film. A lot of people said, this is not as good as your first film. In fact, some people, I must tell you a story. It's to me, probably the best response to my film. Nishant, I made this Nishant, and it ran, and then that's the time when I discovered that there was a loyal audience. I was walking down a street in Bombay, looking for trying to hail a cab, and then there was this old man walking, crossing the road towards me. He saw me, and he crossed the road towards me. He had a walking stick in his hand. And the moment he came close to me, he pointed his walking stick at me. That I thought, why this sudden aggression? I was taken aback a little. He said, you did something terrible to me. I couldn't sleep after I saw your film, Nishant. I couldn't sleep. So I said, is that a bad thing or a good thing? So he said, no film has moved me the way your film did. I thought that was fantastic. Nobody's ever said that to me, So it's quite extraordinary. So after that I made one film after another, and then I discovered that there was a continuing contact with an audience, and I started to enjoy that. The fact that I had opened up a communication line with an audience, and this audience was willing to see the film and to say, this is terrible, or this is not so good, or this is better than what you did last time, and so on and so forth. Otherwise I wouldn't have survived.
It's a dialogue.
So it is a dialogue, because you discover, the main thing is to know that you have an audience. And I do believe that the audiences have always existed. We have not had the way to take our films to them. The conventional means of taking films to them don't always work. So in my case, I had somebody, during my early films, I had a producer who was doing it, I don't know for what, maybe for love of cinema, because it wasn't the money that attracted him. Because he told me in the beginning, when I made Ankur, the first thing he told me is that, well, I've got this little money, you go and make this film. He said, but I know something. He said, you'll become famous, I'll make money. And he said, then you shouldn't mind that. He said, so I said, I certainly won't mind that, because, and it did work out that way. Because he didn't lose money, and he could continue to produce my films. And he had a means to distribute. That was the main thing. Conventional distributors wouldn't touch the film. He had a means to distribute it, and that's how we discovered our audience. Because it was all there. They were just waiting for the films. And they continue to wait for the films. And if it is so in India, it is so in Pakistan. Well, you see, many years ago, it was in the early 60s that the government of India started a small institution to finance films. It was called the Film Finance Corporation. That Film Finance Corporation collapsed under a heap because the people who wanted money to make films had no serious ambition to make films of any kind of artistic merit. They were just making the kind of films that people normally make. And they had the added advantage. So, as we say in Bombay, kiske baap ka kya jata hai? Government of India se paise le liye, and then you don't have to return the money because of the government. So the Film Finance Corporation collapsed. So soon after that, in the late 60s, then the government of India went back and started yet another organization, which eventually became an organization in 1980. It was called the National Film Development Corporation. The National Film Development Corporation had two objectives, essentially. One was that there was a certain amount of money kept to help make films of those people who would not get conventional finance. Finance conventionally, because their ideas or the kind of films they wanted to make were in marketability terms were quite uncertain. But the subject matter was interesting, or the way the person wanted to make the film was interesting. So they kept a certain amount of money, and they said, this is developmental work. You don't expect to earn profit from this. And then the other side was to start a distribution thing in which they would distribute even commercial films, foreign films and so on, so that they could earn money, and from that profit keep this money aside constantly for developmental work. Now, it hasn't worked too well, but it has helped to create a whole body of films since that time. In the last 12 years, I would say that they have produced over 30-35 films. Now, not all of them of very high merit. But I have personally never taken any money from the NFDC to make a film, simply because over the last decade, the reason I didn't do it was because I felt that one of the dangers of doing something with a subsidy is tying yourself to somebody else's apron strings, you know. It's a problem, because if you do that, then you develop a sense of dependence, and you think you have a right to demand. And I don't believe that one has a right to demand. I felt that we should, if the new cinema has to stand on its own two feet, it should be able to do it by, themselves, and go into the marketplace and do it there, and not expect to do it with subsidies, and not expect that you can create a great big movement with help from the government.
You have talked about the loyal audience. Probably you were pinpointing the persistent ones. The question is that whether
That's a large number.
the question is whether you have been able to increase the number of this audience during the last 20 years or not. This question becomes more relevant and important by looking at the very reduced number of good or new cinema movies in India.
How? I mean, I couldn't. I didn't get. The number hasn't increased. No. The films. The number of. You see, there have been.
Number of films, number of audience.
The audiences have increased, but historically many things have happened, particularly in the last 14 years. One is that the coming of television. Nationwide television. Suddenly, our main audience became an audience for the box, for television. So there was this sudden movement towards television, because everybody would sit at home and look at things on television. Now, television also did something else. It started to take not necessarily the subject matters as much as the manner and so many things that the new cinema was trying to bring in. Much of that got preempted by television. That was one of the main things that happened. So the audience continued to be large, but it had to be shared with television and the cinema. And it affected the new cinema far more than it affected the regular mainstream cinema. If 30%, because it's been estimated that the cinema audiences that were lost to television in India was up to about 30 to 35%. But in terms of, for the kind of films I make, the audiences we lost to television was about 50%. This was also, accelerated because of the coming of video.
Yours is altogether different proposition, new cinema. And secondly, if they have been taken away by television, that means they were not loyal, or they are not loyal.
No. I mean that you are taking loyalty. Literal loyalty, taking oaths of loyalty. No. I don't mean that way. You see, what has happened is, like, say, for instance, television does show. Now, Indian television does show. But we have three film slots. We have a film slot on Sunday afternoon film slot. They started to show films of the new cinema. So the audience in fact increased, but it didn't increase in terms of people who go to the cinema to watch it. The audiences in fact are continuing to increase. The main thing is how to get them back into the cinemas away from their homes. To look at these not as works for television, but works for the cinema. That is really our problem today.
Perhaps I'm a little confused about this. You talked in terms of a film being made in a particular year, say 1945, so it remains a film made in that particular year. And how do you account for some films, like all great art or all great creation, becoming timeless? The concept of time is relevant.
Right. Now with films are so locked into the fashion of the time, the look of the time. Even, say for instance, if you make a film in 1945, the way the whole thing of how you look at the world in 1945 will be part of that film, including the technology involved in making the film.
No, agreed. But then there is what is known as great cinema, which is truly timeless. So
there are very, very few films that go beyond that. Yes, there have been, but how many can you name? There are very few films. Of the thousands and thousands of films that have been turned out in the last 90 years of the cinema, you will find that when you actually sit down to find out if they have broken the bounds of their own time, you will not find more than 15 or 20. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. No, I'm now not talking about, I'm not, it's like saying, in literature you make the difference between the Harold Robbins and Sidney Sheldons, and then you make the difference between what has some kind of literary merit. Similarly, in the cinema, you've already made that. But even then, even after you made that distinction and you look at the other films, they still have the big problem of going beyond their time.
I want to say the devil's advocate.
Yes.
Everybody's talking about timelessness and how great art transcends the value of time. I tend to think rather that perhaps there is no such thing as a timeless art. If all art forms, no matter how great, have their time period, are produced in a particular time period and belong to that, even if they have certain elements that, yes, one has known all through history and will forever know, but still each product of art or literature is pretty strongly rooted in the dimensions of its time, the styles of its time, and the beliefs and the norms of its time. Even Shakespeare, for that matter, you cannot say is completely timeless. I'm just saying that devil's advocate as well.
Well, I'll tell you, does that work have the capability still to move you or stir you in any way? If it doesn't, then it has not transcended its time. That's the real test. I mean, the rule of the thumb is very simple. Does that work move you? It doesn't. You see it as a curiosity. You see it for other reasons, other than for the reasons you look at something. You look at a film so that it will provide you with some kind of an experience. It will provide you with some kind of an insight. It will provide you with some kind of an emotional charge, something. It'll make you think. But if it doesn't do that, it hasn't moved. If you're going to look at it as a curiosity, and it is wonderful for other reasons. You say, but how quaint, how wonderful, how it used to be. But that's not what it is. It hasn't moved at all. It hasn't transcended the time barrier. But you will notice then that in other works, like whether it is painting or poetry or something, the normal thing is for them to transcend their time. And it is not normal for cinema to transcend its time.
You talked about sex and violence in cinema, and that might be in bad taste. But sex and violence, and for that matter religion, are very important subjects of contemporary controversial sort of stuff, which serious filmmakers bring in. Don't you think that it puts a lot of restraint or curbs on the filmmaker to think of what's good for the public, or do we have to really give them healthy and positive stuff? And doesn't it put a lot of restraint on the film and what he wants to do?
No, I don't mean it like that at all. I don't think there is a question of saying a filmmaker sits there and says, no, I will not deal with violence because it's bad for my audience. Not at all. That's not what I meant. What I'm saying is using these things in order to draw audiences simply by manipulating. There are so many subjects. Say for instance now, look at the normal film that is being made today, whether it is here, I don't know, I haven't seen too many films in Pakistan. Certainly I can tell you in India. What happens is that the majority of films, what are they saying? What is the signal of these films? It's telling you that you should hate. You should hate. That's number one. And you should venge yourself against the person who has done great damage to you. And why has he done great damage to you? You don't know why that person has done. Just because he's bloody minded, he has done great damage to you, so you must venge yourself. you know, upon that person. Now, wait, this is your basic thing. So, hate, you know, violence, vengeance. Now, these three things are the signals that go through every film. Now, if these are the signals, I mean, is this actually the reality of life? Is this actually the reality of life? I know that there's a lot of violence in the world. I do know that. I will deal with violence, but not in these simple terms. And then to say that, you know, at the smallest, at the most trivial, you are given the most trivial reasons why you should break down the law and take law into your own hands.
What's real life?
Is that real life?
I mean, people do things like
Some of us it is.
No.
Some of us it is. For some of us it is the reality.
Yeah.
It really is. In some
And for
parts
that
of the world
matter,
it is the reality.
religion, you cross that limit, you have committed blasphemy. Look at Last Temptation of Christ, look at Goodfellas. The American PGA ratings, they're all doing the same stuff that, you know.
You see, now if you take a film like Goodfellas, I personally think it's a very brilliant film.
That's right.
No, but it does not automatically assume the signal. I mean, it does not throw the signals I'm telling you about. That's not the signals of the film to you and to me. Now that's the difference. How do you deal with violence? You should be able to deal with violence in other ways than what constantly is hammered from the screen. You see, now this is purely manipulative.
Can we go back to one of your answers to this question about you said nostalgia. I agree nostalgia plays a very important role in this filmmaking, particularly Faiz work, your own work, when Hussain's work with Sikar. But you know, if your approach is sentimental towards your nostalgia or time, then I've faced a few problems with certain films like, for instance, Nandi. In fact, another film which Achamrat, Cry of Freedom, I think, that too was a bit sentimental, that approach was sentimental. And I've been watching your films also, and your approach, I would say, has been a bit objective, not sentimental towards your own nostalgia or the time. But I'll defer to one of your films called Sikar. I had a few problems with that, with the length, and can you...
I don't know your problem, so I don't know what to say. Because I would be able to answer it if I knew what your problem was. But I do agree. There is a nostalgia. You know, dealing with nostalgia in a sentimentalized way. Yes, I agree. If you sentimentalize anything, it loses that much of reality. We do understand that. But I don't know the problems that you are referring to.
Comparing with regard to a work like Nandi.
Yes.
Nandi, I think, was told about that time period, written in, was brilliantly done. I thought the approach was very subjective. But with Srikan, I don't know. Good point, but it didn't have that balance. Maybe because of your length. Maybe you got carried away with the...
Well, yeah, I got carried away by that film. I still do. Right? Yeah. जी जी
And the modern Indian filmmaker has been very critical of his work. How do you feel about performance over the last 10 years?
Well, I have always been a great admirer of Mr. Ray. It does not prevent me from being critical of the work, some of his work. Doesn't prevent me from being critical. I continue to think that he is probably the greatest filmmaker produced in this subcontinent. a lot of people, if they do criticize him in all sorts of ways, not seriously critical of his work, but generally criticize him, it's for reasons that are very clear, that have nothing to do with the cinema. Yes.
Films are timeless in a sense.
Yes. Well, not all of them, but some of them are. Yes, some of them are. Yes.
One last question because it's load shedding.
You made a statement.
Oh, we have to do.
That you made a statement that good movies show life in process, and they cover different aspects of life at the moment. At the same time, you link your movies with the economy, with the market. At one stage, that they should refund the finances, and at the second stage, you said that the audience remains loyal. If movie is an art, and art means understanding and the development of understanding, do you think there is always a certain level of understanding of this art at the same time where there are other social, political and other trends which change the thinking and the pattern of thinking of the people? And if they don't like that aspect, they want the facet of some other things, do you think in that way your movies showing all the two aspects of life would be successful? Or how would it be return?
Actually, it's your question. I'm trying to follow the labyrinthine passages of your question because no, really, the context. I find because you made three statements, but they were without their contexts. It'd be difficult to process them, you know. So, but when you say, you see, the fact is that I work with a medium whose contradictions I must understand, and I should be able to deal with it. And so when you say you have to, the fact is that the film is an industry, and it demands that the film you make must cover its cost and make a profit. That is given. That is already given even before you start making a film. That is an essential reality I cannot ever forget. But having taken that, knowing that, does not prevent me from having artistic ambitions for my film. Does not prevent me. Now you see, it's an excuse when people say, oh, but I have to do it because this is what it is. But surely, you know, human beings have imaginations. What are they there for?
Thank you for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
And I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank the Goethe Institute for extending their full cooperation and assistance. I thank you for your time, for being here, and I thank Mr. Bengal and Neera Bengal from the bottom of our hearts for being with us today and making Faiz Mela such a success. I'd like you all to join us in a cup of tea outside, and there are some copies of resume of Mr. Bengal, if anybody would like to have them, and if you would later on, then perhaps I can make more copies for you.